Good morning, everyone. Hey, this is Tractor Man 44. Working on these old tractors and stuff, as much as what me and my older brother do, you find yourself all the time needing to come up with a way to put a temporary way to get fuel to the carburetor. I've made tons of them out of everything you can imagine, from copper tubing, large, like two and a half inch copper tubing, 2 foot long, and all that kind of stuff, all the way to regular 2-gallon fuel containers, things like that, and many regular Freon gas tanks. But my absolute favorite is the new Freon, which is Refrigerant 410. It's a much higher pressure refrigerant. Consequently, the tanks that contain it, those tanks are a lot heavier. It's a thicker gauge material to sustain that higher pressure of that higher pressure refrigerant. So we're going to make one out of another Refrigerant 410. 410's that pink, that pretty looking pink. Now what I like to do is I like to buff that all up so I get some good weld. Get the little safety plug out of there by whatever means possible, hole saw or whatever. And once you get that out of there, I always take a telescopic magnet and reach down inside and pick up all the way around the perimeter any kind of metallic shavings or whatever, that might have gotten there from the process of cutting it out. Then go ahead and get a scrap piece of black iron pipe, whatever size is very close to the opening, and stick it in here, and then use a MIG welder and weld it into place. And then that'll give you just a little bit off of the bottom. If you set the tank perfectly level, it'll have a little bit of an area for the sediment and stuff, because the inside of this tank will rust, but it'll give you that little bit of a sediment placed there at the bottom instead of letting it draw out of the tank until you drive around it sloshes, which is why you just about have to a really low resistance fuel filter, in the fuel line. In spite of my attempts to make it as nasty as could be, it turned out quite nice. If you watch my channel, I always stress the point that, I don't do how-to videos simply because there's many more people out there much more qualified to do the things that I do in a much better fashion. So, if you want to learn something, you got to go look at those guys. But every now and then, there's a little granule of information that might slip through, unbeknownst to me, that might become helpful to somebody. Today might be one of those days, I don't know. But I'm going to show y'all here. I've got to go to a 1/4 inch pipe thread off of that 3/4 inch fitting I just welded into that tank. So I've got a piece of copper right here and I've got a piece of brass. Now what I'm going to do, and the key to this is shining and cleaning that copper and that brass just as clean as you possibly can. And I'm going to stick this in here. This is it's a bushing reducer. It's not a reducing coupling. And this is just a little bit too big to go down inside there, but I don't want it to go down inside. I want to have that void around the perimeter. And I've cleaned the inside of this piece of copper here. So what we're going to do is we're going to press that down just a little bit, and we're going to use a product called white paste flux. It's a white brazing flux used specifically for 6% and 15% silver soldering to stick dissimilar metals such as brass to copper. Okay, now that's in there where it's going to hold. Here's the product I'm going to use. This is a stick of 15% silver solder. It says Harris right here, Harris 15. That's 15% silver. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use that stick of silver, and I'm going to apply very generously that white paste flux to where whenever I heat it up, it'll liquefy and it'll draw down in between those two dissimilar metals. And when the temperature gets just right, it's going to pull my 15% silver right down in alongside there, and it's going to create just a tremendously solid, secure joint. I'll be able to go from 3/4 pipe thread, male pipe thread, by using this female adapter, to 1/4 inch male pipe thread by using this 1/4 inch female adapter. So in one fitting we're succeeding in coming off the tank and going to my shutoff valve. So now you say, how do you do that? Okay, well that's where the kick comes in. You have to have a torch that gives you enough temperature to get that to happen. I do not remember the specifics on this, but it flows at around 12, or melts at around 12 or 1300 degrees and flows at like 1450 degrees. Now I'm pulling those numbers completely out of a memory that's been faded for so many years. That's probably not right, but it ain't too far off. Getting this hot enough may be just right on the upper limit of a Burns-O-Matic handheld torch running MAP gas. I think you could probably do it. It might take a little while because the physical diameter, physical size of this, and the rate at which it's going to absorb that heat and transfer that heat down to the vise. It might take a little bit. It might tax your patience. Now a Press-A-Lite torch, which is acetylene only, that definitely would be adequate to do this, but your torch of choice should be a regular oxygen acetylene, and I prefer for small delicate work to have the little micro or the small tip, because you can control that heat in a more defined area and keep from wasting so much solder down inside the joint. So let's fire it up and see what happens. So now we got to let this cool down. We'll kind of buff that up, take a look at it. It's not going to be necessarily pretty. We're not looking to win a beauty contest. We're looking for something that's not going to leak. So we'll buff that up and then take a look-see. So here's our completed fitting. A little bit ugly. I'm a little bit out of practice, you know. The next step will be coming up with a fitting to solder or weld on the other side of the tank to get fuel into it. By the way, let me point out, I should have shown you preparing all these fittings. These are all used scrap fittings that I brought home over the years out of tear-outs and stuff off of job sites. You know, all rusty on the inside and outside. I got to take the buffing wheel and shine them all up to make them good for this. That's part of the job that's not glamorous. What we're going to do here is whenever we put this in, we're going to have a vent in the top so that we won't have to worry about cracking anything loose while the fuel is running out of the tank. It won't draw a vacuum and stop the fuel flow by putting a vent in. Again, despite my efforts to the contrary, it turned out halfway decent. Now, if you're like me, you got a junk drawer, so you always go and check when you need something special. And what I needed was a piece of brass with wrinkles on the end. These wrinkles happen to be 1/4-inch pipe thread. So go to the toolbox, pull out a 1/4-inch pipe tap. We're going to take the cap that's going to be the gas tank cap. We're going to drill us a hole anywhere in the top. We're going to thread it with 1/4-inch pipe threads. We're going to attach that to it, and then I just got a piece of old 1/4-inch OD tubing, and of course this doesn't fit down inside here. You can see that does not fit, but all we're going to do is just drill that with a drill press. We're going to slide this right down in here, and then we're going to use that white paste flux and that 15% silver, and we're going to stick this, and then that's going to give us a vent to where we don't have to worry about drawing a vacuum on the tank and getting a tractor to stall. We drilled the center of this out. That will slide right down inside there now. We got cut off some wrinkles down inside there, so we'll put a little bit of stuff on there. I forgot what size bit I used. It was something 64th. We'll put some Teflon tape, pipe dope, gas oil, whatever on this, thread that in there, and that's good to go. Then we're going to stick that with that white paste flux and 15% silver, the same stuff we used yesterday. Yesterday was dissimilar metals. Today is the same thing, dissimilar metals. Now, you know, I should clarify something. I said dissimilar metals, you can use a white paste flux and a 15% silver. You have to know which dissimilar metals you can do. Copper to brass is absolutely phenomenal to work. It does not work with all different metals. Put that paste flux in there. As soon as you get the heat, it'll liquefy and run right down in that joint. Quick and simple. There's another 15% silver joint between copper and brass. Nice and secure. Again, we don't have to go for a beauty, we're not in a beauty contest. It doesn't have to be pretty, as long as it doesn't leak. It extends down in here, that's going to create our vent. I tell you all the time that I don't do how-to videos, but I'm not going to tell you that every now and then you might not pick up a little trick that you might not know. Of course, there's many people that know one heck of a lot more than I do. But say you're in a situation where you have to cut these small diameter tubings and you don't have a tubing cutter or whatever, you can take your file like this. If you're fortunate enough to have a vise, you can use the vise, but I can actually do it free-handed fairly easily. But go ahead and chuck it up like that and use your vise, and then put that on an angle. I can actually see the center of it already. Once you get it like that, you can go like and cut it off. and you're good to go. Then you can go ahead and you can file this, trim this up a little bit, whatever. If you're going to make a flare fitting, you have to take a little more care. If you're going to make a double flare, it's even more care yet. Compression fitting, not so much. You can just go ahead and use it like it is, just about. But I'll go ahead and trim it just a little bit. You know what, I thought of another thing y'all might not know. You know, working this back and forth like I've been doing this morning, it's work hardening, and it's getting really, really, really tough. It's getting hard to bend. Sometimes if you get it work hardened too much and you need to bend a 180-degree bend, it'll actually kink, kind of like a hard drawn copper tubing instead of a soft copper tubing. So I'm going to show you what you do in case that happens. See how nice and red we got that? As soon as that cools down, that's going to be just about as soft as a wet noodle. Now bear in mind, whenever you heat that cherry red like I did, you see all the black stuff on the outside, that's oxidation. You have to bear in mind that it also produces that oxidation down the inside. So you'll want to blow that all out. Otherwise you have a tendency to get that oxidation down inside in your fuel tank. That carbon, flaky carbon. And then just to shine it up a little bit, just to make it look a little pretty. Now you don't have to do this at all, but if you want a nice neat, if you're trying to make a nice neat bend, take a look at how soft this is now. I could no more have bent that quick, that simple, that easy when it was work hardened. There we go. So dope it, put the cap on, we're ready. So we just snug that up right into here. There's our working vent. Now we can slosh the tank all around, and it's not going to, no matter what kind of bumps I go across, it's not going to slosh and come up and flood down out of the vent. And it's going to allow the tank to run right into my carburetor without drawing a vacuum on the tank. You go in the direction that you want to tighten your threads. You know, pipe dope is a funny thing. People always think of pipe dope as being the sealant. It does do a certain degree of sealing, but the threads, the pitch of the threads, are designed to seal themselves. But you can't hardly draw them up tight enough to seal themselves without a lubricant. And so your pipe dope is primarily a lubricant for the pipe threads so that you can successfully engage the threads to the point at which the threads will not leak. Alright, there's some different schools of thought about that. Now if you turn that backwards, if you put that on there backwards, as soon as you tighten this up, that tape just starts unwinding. Now we don't have to worry about this on the top because this is going to come on and off every time you put gas in it. It may look a little silly, you know, being such a god-awful looking contraption, but the thing of it is, you know, we're doing this all temporary. You never know. It may be on this tractor for 2 years before I get around to getting the tank serviced and getting the tank back on. In the meantime, I can use this tractor for anything I want to use it for. Now I tell you, there is a drawback to using a copper threaded female adapter whenever you go into fittings. But I tell you why. Because the copper is definitely a much weaker material. It's a much softer material. And you can tighten it down onto your steel fitting and tighten it and keep tightening, and it will expand simply because the steel is so hard and the copper is not. And so you can get in a situation where you can tighten it all the way to the hilt, and it has continuously spread up to the point to where you cannot get it to quit leaking. So that's one of the downfalls to using or a threaded reducing coupling over a bushing type fitting. But this is going to work out just fine in this application. Now we've got to put our petcock in and go for it. So here you have it, a substantial temporary fuel tank that's going to hold a couple of gallons of gasoline to work on these old antique tractors, you know, and it never costs you anything because virtually everything is used or salvaged material, you know, off of job sites and all that stuff. It's fully functional, and my tractors sometimes, you know, might run around. I've had one temporary fuel tank on an old road grader, I think, for, good Lord, I bet 6 years or so. You know, you just get busy. So at any rate, we beat this one to death, and this Tractor Man 44, and I am out of here.